December 2nd, 1988. 3:25 p.m. Mike Warner climbed the concrete stairs to apartment 12, his breath fogging in the Michigan cold. He'd clocked out early from the factory. Promised Kathy he'd grab milk on the way home. The door hung open, just an inch, just enough. Cold air spilled out from inside, mixing with something else. A smell. Copper, iron, something primal that made his stomach clench before his brain caught up. He pushed inside. Christmas lights blinked red and green against walls painted in blood. The living room looked like a slaughterhouse, handprints smeared across the wallpaper, a crimson trail leading down the hallway toward the bedroom. The Christmas tree, that scraggly discount lot tree Kathy had decorated with such pride, stood tilted in the corner, tinsel catching the blinking lights. Ornaments scattered across the carpet like fallen stars. Mike's legs carried him forward. He didn't want to go. His body moved anyway. In the bedroom, on the floor beside the bed they'd shared just hours ago, lay Kathy Sue Swartz, 19 years old, mother of a 9-month-old baby, the woman he planned to marry. Her throat gaped open, her eyes stared at nothing. On the refrigerator in the kitchen, scrawled in her blood, 3 words waited for him. I was here. 35 years. That's how long Three Rivers, Michigan would wait for answers. That's how long a killer would hide in plain sight, building a life, raising children, attending church, while a baby girl grew up studying photographs of the mother she'd never remember. This is the story of Kathy Swartz, and the monster who thought he'd gotten away with murder. Before we continue this shocking story, take a second to hit subscribe and like this video. Your support helps bring these forgotten stories to light, and the algorithm gods make sure you don't miss future uploads. Now let me tell you about the young woman whose life was stolen that December day, and the fire inside her that refused to die. Three Rivers, Michigan sits where the St. Joseph River meets the Rocky and Portage Rivers, a confluence that gave the town its name back in 1831. Population was 7,700 on a good census year. The kind of place where everybody knows everybody's business, where the same families have farmed the same rolling hills for 4 generations, and where Friday night football games at Wildcat Stadium packed the stands regardless of the team's record. In 1988, Three Rivers moved at a gentle pace. The bowling alley on Main Street hosted league nights every Tuesday and Thursday. The corner diner served coffee for 60 cents and gossip for free. Church bells rang every Sunday at 9, calling the faithful to pews their grandparents had warmed. The annual Blueberry Festival drew crowds from across southwest Michigan for pie-eating contests, craft booths, and a parade that featured the high school marching band and every fire truck in the county. Folks left their doors unlocked in Three Rivers. Children rode bikes until the streetlights flickered on. Neighbors waved from porches and dropped off casseroles when someone fell ill. Tragedy happened somewhere else, in Detroit and Chicago, on the evening news safely distant from these quiet streets near the Indiana border. That belief, that comfortable illusion of safety, would shatter completely on December 2nd, 1988. Kathy Sue Swartz came into the world on May 24, 1969 in Mendon, Michigan. Her father, David, worked manufacturing jobs, long shifts that left his hands calloused. Her mother, Audrey, everyone called her Augie, stretched every dollar and made every meal from scratch. The family wasn't wealthy, but what they lacked in money they made up for in love. We had barbecues every summer, David recalled years later, his voice thick with memory. The whole family would come over, kids running around the yard. Augie's potato salad, nobody made it like her. And Kathy right in the middle of everything, laughing louder than anybody. The Swartz home buzzed with life. A menagerie of animals populated the property. Dogs, cats, a few chickens, and Kathy's most prized possession, a pony she'd begged for on 3 consecutive birthdays until David finally relented. She named him Star and spent hours brushing his mane, feeding him apple slices, riding him bareback through the fields behind the house. Christmas meant homemade cookies, sugar cookies with colored frosting, gingerbread men with raisin eyes, and a tree so loaded with ornaments it leaned dangerously to one side. Kathy hung every decoration herself, standing on a step stool to reach the higher branches, insisting on perfection. She loved Christmas more than any kid I ever knew, Augie would say later. Started planning her decorations in October. Drove us crazy, but Lord, she made everything beautiful. As a girl, Kathy was all tomboy energy and unbridled curiosity. She joined the Girl Scouts at 7, earning badges for camping, knot tying, first aid, and outdoor survival. While other girls her age played with dolls, Kathy tagged along on hunting trips with her father, her small hands steady on a .22 rifle, her eyes sharp for movement in the tree line. She was a natural, David said. Better shot than most grown men, patient, focused. She'd wait hours for the right moment. But beneath the freckles and the fearless grin lived an artist's soul. Kathy filled notebook after notebook with sketches, portraits of friends, fantastical landscapes with castles and dragons, tender drawings of wildflowers she'd picked from the roadside. Her art teachers at school noticed immediately. "That girl has talent," one wrote on a report card. "Real talent. She sees the world differently." Kathy dreamed of art school, maybe graphic design, maybe illustration. She'd spend hours poring over magazines, studying the advertisements, imagining her own work printed on glossy pages for the whole world to see. She had this fire, a childhood friend recalled in a 2023 Wood TV interview, decades after the murder. Kathy didn't back down from anything. If she wanted something, she went after it. If someone told her she couldn't do something, she'd prove them wrong just to see the look on their face. The family moved to Three Rivers when Kathy was in her early teens, chasing opportunity when David landed work at the bowling alley. The transition wasn't seamless. Three Rivers High School could be cliquey, and Kathy, with her farm girl roots and secondhand clothes, sometimes felt like an outsider looking in. But she adapted. She always adapted. At 5'5", with shoulder-length brown hair and hazel eyes that sparkled with mischief, Kathy learned to charm her way into any circle. Her laugh, loud, genuine, impossible to ignore, could disarm even the coldest classmate. She worked odd jobs to help with family bills, waitressing at local diners, clerking at the pharmacy, babysitting for neighbors. Every dollar she didn't need for necessities went into a savings account marked art school. Life accelerated at 17. Kathy dropped out of her senior year at Three Rivers High, not from laziness, not from lack of ambition, but from necessity. She'd fallen in love with a local boy, and in March 1988, at just 18 years old, she gave birth to a baby girl, Courtney Marie, 6 pounds, 4 ounces, a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold the whole world. The baby's father faded quickly. Too young, too scared, too unwilling to shoulder the responsibilities of parenthood. Kathy didn't waste time on bitterness. She simply did what she'd always done, adapted, survived, pushed forward. Courtney was her world, Augie said years later, eyes glistening. From the moment that baby was born, Kathy was transformed. She'd sing to her at night, lullabies she made up on the spot, silly songs about butterflies and stars. She'd rock her for hours when she was fussy. That girl was determined to give her daughter everything she never had. To make ends meet, Kathy moved into the Riverside townhouses, a low-rent complex of brick 2-bedroom units on East Hoffman Street. The apartments were basic, peeling wallpaper in the kitchen, threadbare carpets, windows that let in drafts during winter. But they were affordable, and they were hers. She decorated the walls with her drawings, planted geraniums in window boxes, scrimped for formula and diapers, sometimes eating ramen for a week straight so Courtney could have the good baby food. By fall of 1988, Kathy had met someone new. Mike Warner was a steady 20-something factory worker with a gentle demeanor and kind eyes. They'd known each other at Three Rivers High, though they hadn't been close then. Now, reconnected, they fell into an easy rhythm. Mike wasn't Courtney's father, but he stepped up without hesitation, treating the baby like his own, feeding her bottles at 2 a.m., changing diapers without complaint, calling her my girl with a tenderness that made Kathy's heart swell. They talked about marriage, a small ceremony, maybe in spring. Augie and David approved. The future, for the first time in years, looked bright. November 1988 brought the first chill of Michigan winter, but Kathy refused to let the cold dampen her spirits. She strung twinkling lights around the living room, secured a scraggly Christmas tree from a discount lot on the edge of town, and spent an entire afternoon decorating it while Courtney watched from her bouncy seat, gurgling at the shiny ornaments. Presents accumulated beneath the tree, wrapped carefully in paper Kathy had bought on sale, ribbons she'd salvaged from previous years. Soft blankets for Courtney, a stuffed bear with a red bow, a rattle shaped like a star. Friends dropped by with casseroles and baby clothes. Augie and David visited weekly, cooing over their granddaughter, marveling at how fast she was growing. Kathy, ever the optimist, confided in her mother about wedding plans. Nothing fancy, just family and close friends at the courthouse, maybe a reception at the bowling alley afterward. She was so happy, Augie remembered, happier than I'd seen her in years. She had Mike, she had Courtney, she had plans. What none of them knew, what they couldn't possibly have known, was that shadows lurked in their social circle, darkness wearing a familiar face. Mike, reconnecting with old classmates, had invited a buddy over one evening in early November. Just a casual visit, a chance to catch up. Robert Waters stopped by the apartment, lingered briefly, chatted about old times. Kathy smiled politely, offered coffee. Waters declined, said he had to run, waved goodbye. It was nothing, unremarkable, forgettable, or so they thought. The morning of December 2nd dawned gray and bitter. Temperatures hovered in the low 20s and a thin layer of frost coated the windows of apartment 12 at Riverside Townhouses. Inside, the Christmas lights provided the only warmth, blinking their cheerful colors against the gloom. Kathy woke early, as she always did, to Courtney's hungry cries. She padded to the baby's room in her slippers, scooped up her daughter, and settled into the rocking chair for a morning feeding. The apartment was quiet, save for the creak of the chair and Courtney's contented sounds. Mike, bleary-eyed from a late shift the night before, stirred around 5:30 a.m. He worked second shift at a nearby factory, punching in at 3 p.m., punching out at 11 p.m., home by midnight most nights. The schedule meant their mornings together were precious and brief. He found Kathy in the kitchen, hair tied back in a messy ponytail, wearing jeans and a holiday sweater with a reindeer on the front. She was nursing a cup of instant coffee while Courtney, propped in her high chair, smeared strained peas across her cheeks with cheerful abandon. Mike kissed them both goodbye around 6 a.m., ruffled Kathy's hair affectionately. "Be good, babe," he said. She grinned up at him, that grin that had won him over months ago. "Always am. Pick up milk on the way home?" "You got it." The door clicked shut behind him. His pickup truck rumbled to life in the parking lot. He pulled away, off to grab breakfast before his shift, unaware that he'd never see Kathy alive again. The night before had been ordinary bliss. They'd grabbed fish and chips from a local spot, the greasy paper wrappers crinkling as they laughed over board games on the living room floor. Sorry. First, Kathy won as she usually did, her competitive streak emerging even in family games. Then payday, which Mike dominated, his careful budgeting skills translating perfectly to fake money. Courtney, teething and fussy from a long day, went down around 8 p.m., tucked into her crib in the second bedroom with her favorite blanket and the stuffed elephant she couldn't sleep without. The apartment fell quiet. Kathy and Mike curled up on the couch watching television until midnight. Nothing memorable. Sitcom reruns, maybe a late-night talk show. The comfortable silence of a couple who didn't need constant conversation to feel connected. They slipped into bed together, tangled in flannel sheets, and drifted off to the sound of wind rattling the windows. No arguments, no visitors, no hint of what was coming. After Mike left for work, Kathy moved through her morning routine. Fed Courtney breakfast, changed her diaper, bundled her in a puffy pink snowsuit for a quick outing. Witnesses later placed Kathy at the grocery store around 10 a.m., pushing Courtney in a cart down the aisles. The cashier remembered her clearly, friendly, chatty, asking about holiday recipes, her laugh cutting through the fluorescent buzz of the store. She seemed happy, the cashier told police, talked about Christmas, said it was her daughter's first one. She was excited. Back home by noon, Courtney, tired from the outing, went down for a nap around 1 p.m. without protest. The apartment settled into afternoon stillness. Kathy, alone now, might have sketched at the kitchen table, might have folded laundry, might have wrapped a few more presents while listening to Bing Crosby croon White Christmas on the radio. The Christmas tree twinkled in the corner. The lights she'd strung so carefully blinked their endless pattern. The presents she'd wrapped with such care waited beneath the branches. A snapshot of holiday peace. Then the front door opened. No knock, no forced entry. The lock didn't splinter, the chain didn't snap. Sometime between 1 and 3 p.m., a figure slipped inside apartment 12 with the ease of someone who knew exactly where he was going. Maybe he had a key, borrowed, copied, stolen. Maybe Kathy had left the door unlocked while the baby slept, small-town habits dying hard. Maybe she opened it herself, recognizing the face on the other side. We'll never know for certain. What we know is this: Kathy didn't scream, at least not loudly enough for neighbors to hear. The attack began quickly, too quickly for her to reach a phone, to run, to barricade herself and Courtney in the bedroom. It began in the living room and spilled into the hallway. Kathy fought. Lord, how she fought. Defensive wounds slashed her arms and hands, deep gashes from a blade that would turn out to be her own kitchen knife, a 6-inch serrated weapon grabbed from the counter. She raked her nails across her attacker's skin, drawing blood that would become crucial evidence decades later. But he overpowered her. Fists connected with her face, her ribs, a belt or cord wrapped around her throat, squeezing until purple bruises bloomed and blood vessels burst in her eyes. Petechial hemorrhaging. The medical examiner would later note, evidence of strangulation. She broke free once, staggered toward the bedroom, perhaps hoping to barricade the door to shield Courtney, to buy time. But he was faster. He caught her in the hallway, tackled her to the carpet. She crawled toward her bedroom, toward her daughter's room just feet away, and he followed, blade in hand. The final assault happened in the master bedroom, a 10 by 12 space with a floral bedspread and a framed drawing of a horse on the wall. Kathy's own artwork hung with pride. 14 stab wounds, chest, neck, arms still raised in desperate defense. One slash severed her carotid artery. Arterial blood sprayed across the walls, the headboard, the ceiling. A volume of blood that told investigators she hadn't died quickly. That told them she'd fought until her body simply couldn't fight anymore. Kathy Sue Swartz took her last breath on that carpet, eyes fixed on the ceiling while her 9-month-old daughter slept in the next room. The killer wasn't unscathed. During the struggle, Kathy had wounded him, nails tearing flesh, the flailing knife catching his hand or arm. His blood mixed with hers at the scene, type O. Kathy was type A. He retreated to the bathroom, barefoot now, his shoes discarded or covered in too much blood to wear. He rinsed in the sink, water swirling pink down the drain. A partial footprint smeared the tile floor, size 10 men's, from a common athletic shoe. Then came the messages. "I was here," he scrawled on the refrigerator in blood. More words on Kathy's leg, a macabre signature, a taunt left for whoever found her. He wasn't just killing. He was performing, announcing himself, reveling in the horror he'd created. He grabbed his things, whatever he'd brought, whatever incriminating evidence he couldn't leave behind, and fled into the December afternoon. In the second bedroom, Courtney stirred once in her crib, fussed briefly at some half-heard sound, then settled back into sleep, her stuffed elephant tucked against her cheek, completely unaware that her mother lay dying 15 feet away. The clock on the wall ticked past 3 p.m. Mike Warner pulled into the parking lot at 3:25 p.m., gravel crunching beneath his tires. He'd gotten off early, eager to get home, already thinking about dinner and the evening ahead. He bounded up the stairs 2 at a time, key in hand. "Kathy, I'm home." Silence answered. The door wasn't locked. It swung open at his touch, revealing the living room. Mike's brain refused to process what his eyes were seeing. Handprints on the walls, smears across the carpet, a metallic smell that coated his tongue and made his stomach heave. "Kathy?" His voice cracked. He moved forward, one step, then another, following the trail of blood down the hallway. The bedroom door stood open, and there, on the floor amid shattered glass from a knocked-over lamp, lay the woman he loved. Curled on her side, throat gaping, eyes open and empty, blood soaking into the carpet, the mattress pooling beneath her in a dark lake that was still spreading. Mike Warner's scream shattered the quiet of riverside townhouses, a sound of pure anguish that neighbors would remember for years. "Kathy! Kathy!" He fell to his knees beside her, reaching out, then pulling back. Some part of him knowing not to disturb the scene, another part desperate to shake her awake, to make this nightmare end. Then he remembered. Courtney. He stumbled to the nursery, heart hammering, certain he'd find another horror waiting. Instead, he found a baby blinking awake in her crib, confused by the noise, reaching up for comfort. She was clean, dry, untouched. The killer had walked right past her, had left her alive. Mike scooped Courtney into his arms, clutching her against his chest, and fumbled for the phone. 911, what's your emergency? His voice came out broken, barely human. My fiancée, she's... Oh God, there's blood everywhere. So much blood. Please send help, please. She's not breathing. I don't think she's breathing. Sir, what's your address? Riverside Townhouses, apartment 12. East Hoffman Street, please hurry. Is anyone else injured? The baby's okay. He was crying now, tears streaming down his face, Courtney whimpering against his shoulder. The baby's okay, but Kathy, please. Please send someone. Help is on the way, sir. Stay on the line. Mike sank to the floor of the nursery, his back against the wall. Courtney clutched to his chest. Daddy's here, he whispered to the baby who wasn't even his. Daddy's here. In the bedroom, Christmas lights continued to blink their cheerful pattern against walls splattered with blood. On the refrigerator, 3 words waited for the investigators who would spend the next 35 years hunting for answers. I was here. Sirens shattered the December stillness within minutes of Mike's 911 call. 3 Rivers Police Department and St. Joseph County Sheriff's deputies converged on riverside townhouses, their cruisers skidding on icy pavement, red and blue lights painting the brick buildings in alternating flashes. Officer Mike Money was among the first through the door. Young, barely 5 years on the force, he thought he'd seen the worst this small town could offer. Bar fights, domestic disputes, a fatal car wreck out on US 131 that still haunted his dreams. Nothing prepared him for apartment 12. Any adjective you could think of for brutal and violent, it was there, Moni recalled in a 2023 interview with Western Michigan University's Cold Case program. His voice, even 35 years later, carried the weight of that afternoon. I walked in and my brain just stopped. Couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. The apartment reeked of death. Copper and iron hung thick in the air, coating the back of his throat. Flies, unseasonably bold for December, already buzzed over the pooling blood. Paramedics rushed past him, though everyone knew it was too late. Kathy's body lay exactly as Mike had found her, curled on the bedroom floor, skin already cooling. No pulse, rigor mortis beginning to set in, stiffening her limbs. Her face was nearly unrecognizable. Swollen, lacerated, one eye blackened completely shut. The violence told its own story. This wasn't quick. This wasn't merciful. This was rage. Michigan State Police crime scene technicians arrived within the hour, called in for their expertise. Three Rivers PD was small, good officers dedicated, but they'd never worked a case like this. Nobody in St. Joseph County had. The technicians moved through the apartment with methodical precision, documenting everything. 8mm film cameras captured every angle of the carnage. Still photographs froze the horror in time. The blood smears on walls, the overturned furniture, the Christmas tree still blinking in the corner like a cruel joke. In the bedroom, investigators cataloged the wounds. 14 stab wounds to the chest, neck, and arms. Defensive injuries on both hands, deep slashes across her palms where she'd grabbed at the blade. Blunt force trauma to the head and torso, consistent with punches and kicks. Ligature marks on her throat, bruising that told of strangulation attempts before the knife finished the job. Dr. Michael McCormick performed the autopsy at Bronson Hospital in Kalamazoo the following day. His findings painted a picture of prolonged suffering, cause of death, exsanguination from the neck wound which had severed the carotid artery. Contributing factors: blunt force trauma and asphyxiation from the strangulation. Time of death: between 1:30 and 2:30 p.m. Toxicology came back clean. No drugs in her system, minimal alcohol, perhaps a glass of wine the night before, nothing more. Kathy had been completely sober when she fought for her life. The crime scene yielded evidence. Not enough to solve the case immediately, but enough to give investigators hope. On Kathy's nightstand sat a pink rotary phone, the kind that was already becoming obsolete in 1988, replaced by push-button models. Smeared across the receiver, pressed into Kathy's drying blood, was a partial print, not hers. Technicians lifted it carefully using ninhydrin spray, preserving the whorls and ridges. The print was clear, partial but usable, a right index finger most likely. Left by someone who had touched that phone while blood still coated their hands. In the bathroom where the killer had apparently washed up, a bloody partial shoe print smeared the tile. Size 10 men's, a common athletic shoe tread, the kind sold at any Kmart or Sears. This was 1988, and genetic testing was still in its infancy. The first DNA conviction in the United States had occurred just the year before. But Michigan State Police had the foresight to preserve biological samples. Semen on Kathy's thigh and underwear indicated an attempted sexual assault, interrupted, investigators theorized, by her fierce resistance. Blood that wasn't hers. Type O, while Kathy was type A. The killer had been wounded during the struggle. Hair and fibers from a dark jacket, skin cells beneath Kathy's fingernails. The evidence told investigators several crucial facts. The killer was male. He had type O blood. He wore size 10 shoes. And Kathy had hurt him, scratched him, cut him, drawn his blood in her final moments of defiance. What the evidence couldn't tell them not yet was a name. Mike Warner sat in an interrogation room for 6 hours that first night. He understood. He was the fiancé. He'd found the body. Statistics said he was the most likely suspect. He answered every question, provided every detail, submitted to every test. His alibi was ironclad. Co-workers at the factory confirmed he'd arrived for his shift at 3 p.m., worked until his early departure around 3:15. Time cards backed them up. Security cameras in the break room showed him eating lunch. There was no blood on his clothes when he arrived at work, no injuries on his hands. His demeanor that day, co-workers said, had been completely normal. Joking around, talking about Christmas plans, mentioning that he needed to pick up milk for Kathy. Mike Warner was cleared within 48 hours, but clearing him didn't bring them any closer to finding the real killer. The investigation exploded outward in concentric circles. Three Rivers PD canvassed 200 homes in the surrounding neighborhoods. Deputies knocked on every door at Riverside townhouses, interviewed every resident, asked the same questions over and over. Did you see anyone unfamiliar? Did you hear anything unusual? Did you notice any vehicles that didn't belong? The answers were maddeningly consistent. Nothing. Nobody. No screams, no sounds of struggle, no strangers lurking in the parking lot. Tips flooded the police station. In the first week alone, over 500 calls came in, some helpful, most not. Every tip was logged, investigated, cross-referenced. A neighbor thought she'd seen a van parked behind the building around 1 p.m. Another resident mentioned a suspicious man walking through the complex that morning. Description vague, useless. Over 1,000 people voluntarily submitted fingerprints for comparison. 300 provided footprints. The community was desperate to help, desperate to prove they hadn't harbored a monster in their midst. The fingerprint from the phone was run through AFIS, the automated fingerprint identification system. No matches in the database. The killer, whoever he was, had never been arrested for a crime that required fingerprinting. Suspects emerged and were eliminated one by one. Troy Daniel Schultes, Kathy's ex-boyfriend and Courtney's biological father. He'd been absent from his daughter's life, which made him suspicious in investigators' eyes. But his alibi held. He was working in another county that day, verified by multiple witnesses and time records. DNA didn't match. By February 1989, detectives had questioned over 150 people extensively. Dozens had been considered serious suspects. All had been cleared. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit provided a profile: white male, between 18 and 25 years old at the time of the murder. Local to Three Rivers, or intimately familiar with the area, blue-collar background, history of resentment toward women, possibly sparked by rejection or perceived humiliation. Someone who knew the victim's world well enough to enter without force. Someone she might have opened the door for. The profile fit half the young men in St. Joseph County, and without more evidence, it was useless. The case file grew, 10,000 pages by 1990. Interviews, forensic reports, tip sheets, photographs, dead ends, all of it boxed and stacked in the evidence room at Three Rivers PD. Leads dried up, tips stopped coming. New crimes demanded attention. Burglaries, assaults, the daily grind of small-town law enforcement. The Kathy Swartz murder became exactly what no detective wanted: cold. Officially, the case remained open. Technically, investigators still pursued leads when they arose, but everyone knew the truth. Without a break, without new evidence, a confession, a witness coming forward, this case would never be solved. Three Rivers moved on, or tried to. New families moved into Riverside townhouses. Apartment 12 was cleaned, repainted, rented again. New tenants hung their own pictures on walls that had once been splattered with blood. New children played in parking lots where a killer had once fled. Most residents didn't know what had happened there. Those who did preferred not to think about it. But one family refused to forget. David and Audrey Swartz took custody of Courtney immediately. There was never any question, never any discussion. She was their granddaughter, their daughter's only child, and she would be raised surrounded by the love Kathy never got to give her. They brought her home to their house in Three Rivers, set up a nursery in the room that had once been Kathy's, surrounded her with photographs of the mother she'd never remember. "She's all we have left of her," Augie told friends. "Every time I look at that baby's face, I see my girl." The first anniversary came too quickly. December 2nd, 1989. Augie organized a memorial at Riverside Cemetery where Kathy had been laid to rest 11 months earlier. Family gathered, friends who'd known Kathy since childhood, a few curious neighbors. They released balloons into the gray December sky, spoke words of love and loss, wept openly without shame. Augie placed a slice of apple pie, Kathy's favorite, on the grave alongside a bouquet of winter flowers. "I'm not giving up," she whispered, kneeling in the frozen grass. "I'll never give up. Whoever did this, I'll find them. I promise you, baby," Mama promises. It was a vow she would keep for 32 years. Every December 2nd, without fail, Augie Swartz woke before dawn. She'd dress in layers against the Michigan cold, wool coat, thick scarf, the boots Kathy had bought her one Christmas years ago. She'd pack a thermos of coffee, a folding chair, and the apple pie she'd baked the night before, staying up past midnight to make sure the crust was perfect. Then she'd drive to Riverside Cemetery alone, while the rest of Three Rivers still slept. The grave was easy to find. Fourth row back, beneath a small maple tree that had been planted the year Kathy died. The headstone was simple, gray granite, nothing fancy. But Augie kept it immaculate. She'd kneel in the frost, brush away the fallen leaves, trace her daughter's name with gloved fingers. "Morning for baby girl," Augie would say, her breath fogging in the cold. "Mama's here." And she'd talk. For hours sometimes. She'd tell Kathy about Courtney, her first steps, her first words, the way she laughed just like her mother. The school plays and birthday parties, the teenage rebellion that made Augie want to tear her hair out. The young woman emerging from the little girl they'd raised. "You'd be so proud of her," Augie would whisper. "She's got your fire, your stubbornness. Lord, does she have your stubbornness?" She'd report on the investigation, too. Whatever scraps of information the detectives shared, the new tips that led nowhere, the technology that might someday crack the case. "They haven't forgotten you," Augie promised. "Neither have I. We're going to find him, Kathy, one way or another." The pie always stayed behind. A slice on a paper plate balanced against the headstone, a tradition that began the first anniversary and never stopped. By noon, others would arrive, David quieter in his grief, preferring action to words. Courtney growing taller every year. Friends, neighbors, occasionally a reporter working an anniversary piece. They'd light candles that flickered against the December wind. Sing songs. Amazing Grace, always. Share memories of a girl frozen forever at 19, 32 years, 32 vigils. Not once did Augie miss. The local news covered the memorials faithfully. Wood TV out of Grand Rapids, WWMT in Kalamazoo, the Herald Palladium from Benton Harbor. Still no answers in Three Rivers murder, the headlines read, year after year. Every 5 years brought major retrospectives. Reporters would dig through archives, interview family members, ask detectives the same questions they'd been asked 100 times before. The coverage served a purpose. Each story generated tips. Most worthless, a few worth checking. Someone who thought they remembered something. Someone who'd heard a rumor. Someone who wanted the reward money that had been established by local businesses. None of it panned out, but the family kept talking to reporters anyway. "Every story keeps her alive," Augie said. "Every time someone sees her face on the news, they think about her. They remember. Maybe somebody out there knows something. Maybe they've been afraid to talk. Maybe seeing her picture will finally make them brave." The coverage also served another purpose, unspoken but understood by everyone. It reminded the killer, wherever he was, that someone still remembered. That justice wasn't finished, that his freedom was borrowed, not earned. "I hope he sees these stories," Augie told Wood TV in 2008, 20 years after the murder. "I hope he watches every single one. I hope it keeps him up at night knowing we haven't stopped looking." Where are you watching from today? Drop a comment below and let us know. Every single comment helps this story reach more people who might remember something from Three Rivers in 1988. If you lived in St. Joseph County back then, if you knew Kathy, if you remember that Christmas when a young mother's murder shocked a small town, we want to hear from you. Share your memories. You might hold a piece of this puzzle without even knowing it. And if you're watching from somewhere else, share this video. The technology that would eventually solve Kathy's murder didn't exist in 1988. But it was coming. The 1990s brought CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, a national database of genetic profiles from convicted offenders. Kathy's case evidence was submitted immediately when the system launched in 1998. "We thought that was our answer," Detective Sergeant Tim Bradley, who inherited the case in 2001, recalled. "When CODIS came online, we thought we'd have him within months. Instead, we got nothing." The early 2000s brought improvements in DNA analysis. Scientists could extract profiles from smaller samples, degraded samples, evidence that would have been useless a decade earlier. The Swartz evidence was retested. The results were clearer, more detailed. Still no match. The 2010s brought a revolution. In April 2018, investigators in California arrested Joseph James DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer, responsible for at least 13 murders and 50 rapes across a decade of terror. They caught him using investigative genetic genealogy, a technique that matched crime scene DNA to relatives who'd uploaded their genetic information to public databases like GEDmatch. The case made national headlines. Cold case detectives across America sat up and took notice. "We watched that arrest," Detective Sam Smallcombe of Three Rivers PD recalled, "and immediately thought about our case. We had the evidence, the fingerprint, the DNA. We just needed the technology to catch up." In 2018, that technology had finally arrived. Othram Labs opened its doors in The Woodlands, Texas in 2018, founded by Dr. David Mittelman. The company specialized in forensic genetic genealogy, the science of building DNA profiles from crime scene evidence and tracing them through family trees to identify perpetrators. Their technique, called forensic-grade genome sequencing, could extract usable genetic information from samples too degraded or too small for traditional testing. Evidence that had sat in storage for decades, evidence that other labs had declared worthless. Cold cases that had languished for 20, 30, 40 years were suddenly solvable. By 2022, Othram had helped identify perpetrators in hundreds of cases. The Swartz murder was flagged as a prime candidate. Michigan State Police's cold case unit applied for a federal grant specifically earmarked for genetic genealogy testing. They received funding in early 2022. At Othram, scientists went to work. The case file at Three Rivers PD had passed through many hands over the decades. Detective Simmons worked it in the early 90s, following tips until they dried up, staring at crime scene photos until they haunted his dreams. He retired in 1998, passing the boxes to Detective Bradley. Bradley brought fresh eyes. He re-interviewed witnesses, re-examined evidence, pursued new theories. He was certain for a time that the killer was someone in Kathy's extended social circle, a friend of a friend, someone who'd been at a party she attended, someone who'd developed an obsession from afar. He couldn't prove it. He retired in 2015. Detective Sam Smallcombe took over, a younger officer who'd grown up hearing about the Swartz case. For him, it wasn't history, it was personal. His mother had known Kathy slightly. His father had been among those who volunteered fingerprints in 1988. "This case belongs to Three Rivers," Smallcombe said. "We owe it to Kathy. We owe it to her family." In 2019, Smallcombe reached out to an unlikely ally, Western Michigan University's Cold Case program. Professor Ashlyn Kurstin had established the program years earlier, recruiting criminal justice students to assist law enforcement with unsolved cases. They weren't investigators, they were organizers, analysts, fresh perspectives unclouded by decades of frustration. Student volunteers spent months digitizing the Swartz file, 10,000 pages scanned, indexed, cross-referenced in databases. Timelines mapped minute by minute, every suspect cataloged, every alibi charted. "We built a spreadsheet of every person mentioned in that file," student researcher Emily recalled. "Names, relationships, whereabouts on December 2nd, 1988. Hundreds of entries." One name kept surfacing in witness interviews. A name noted briefly in 1988, never seriously pursued. Robert Waters. Mike Warner had mentioned him casually during his initial interview. "My buddy Rob Waters stopped by a few weeks before, just to say hi." It was nothing. Unremarkable. A childhood friend dropping in chatting about old times, leaving after a few minutes. But the students flagged it anyway. Here was someone who had been inside the apartment, someone who knew the layout, someone local around the right age fitting the FBI profile. Why hadn't investigators looked harder at Robert Waters in 1988? The answer was simple. They had no reason to. He wasn't a boyfriend, he wasn't a stalker, he wasn't anyone Kathy had conflict with. He was just a guy Mike knew from high school passing through. But the students put his name on the list. And in 2022, when Othram's genetic genealogy results came back, that name would matter very much. Augie Swartz rode the roller coaster every time. A tip would come in, and hope would surge. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was finally the break they needed. Then the disappointment. Then the emptiness. Then the slow rebuild of determination. "Whoever did this thinks they got away with it," Augie told Wood TV in 2016, sitting beside Kathy's grave, the December wind cutting through her coat. "They're wrong. God sees everything. We see everything. The truth always comes out. Always." Courtney Swartz grew up surrounded by a ghost. Not literally. Augie didn't believe in that kind of thing, and neither did David. But Kathy's presence filled their home. Photographs on every wall, artwork she'd created framed and displayed. Stories told so often they became legend. Courtney never knew her mother's voice, never felt her arms around her, never heard her say, "I love you." Everything she knew about Kathy Sue Swartz came secondhand. "Grandma Augie made sure I understood where I came from," Courtney told ABC's 2020 and 2025. "Every single day she told me something about my mom, her laugh, her temper, her talent, the way she'd stay up all night drawing, the way she loved Christmas." As a child, Courtney attended every memorial, clutching her grandmother's hand, watching balloons rise into gray December skies. She didn't fully understand death yet. Just knew that the pretty lady in the photographs was her mama, and mama had gone somewhere she couldn't follow. As a teenager, she asked harder questions. How did she die? Who did it? Why hasn't anyone been caught? Augie told her the truth as much as a mother could. "Someone very bad hurt your mama. The police are still looking. We're going to find him someday." That someday was everything, Courtney recalled. It kept us going. The belief that justice was coming, even if we couldn't see it yet. By her 20s, Courtney had become the public face of the case. She spoke at press conferences, gave interviews, appeared at memorials. She looked remarkably like Kathy. Same brown hair, same hazel eyes, same fierce expression when she talked about finding her mother's killer. "I was 9 months old when she was taken from me," she'd say, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. "I don't remember her, but I carry her with me every single day." She married, had a daughter of her own, named her something that honored Kathy's memory, though she kept the exact name private. "When I held my baby for the first time," Courtney said, "I finally understood what my mother felt. That overwhelming love, that fierce protectiveness. She would have done anything for me. She fought for me with her last breath." Augie's health began failing in 2018. She was 70 years old, worn down by decades of grief and waiting. The cancer diagnosis came in 2019, stage 3, aggressive, spreading. She fought it like she'd fought for justice. Chemotherapy, radiation. Experimental treatments that left her weak and sick, but still refusing to surrender. "I need to see this through," she told Courtney from her hospital bed, tubes running into her arms, monitors beeping steadily. "I promised your mother. I promised her I'd find who did this." But time, that relentless thief, refused to cooperate. On March 14, 2020, Audrey Sue Augie Swartz passed away at 72 years old. Cancer had won. The vigil had ended. Her final words to Courtney, whispered through cracked lips, were simple. "Tell her I love her." She meant both of them, Kathy, waiting somewhere beyond, and the great-granddaughter she'd adored but would never see grow up. Courtney held her grandmother's hand as she slipped away. 32 years of fighting, hoping, refusing to surrender. Gone in a final, shuddering breath. "Bittersweet doesn't begin to describe it," Courtney said later. She never got to see the arrest, never got to know his name. She died still waiting. December 2, 2020 was the first memorial without Augie. Courtney arrived at Riverside Cemetery before dawn, just as her grandmother always had. She carried the thermos, the folding chair, the apple pie baked from Augie's recipe. She knelt at 2 graves now. Kathy's with its maple tree grown tall, and Augie's fresh earth still settling, headstone newly placed. "I'll finish what you started," Courtney whispered, tears freezing on her cheeks. "I promise, Grandma, I promise." She placed a slice of pie at each grave, and she waited, as her grandmother had waited, for a justice that felt further away than ever. The package arrived at Othram Labs in the Woodlands, Texas, on a Tuesday morning in early 2022. Brown cardboard box, evidence, stamped in red across every side, chain of custody documentation folded neatly on top. Inside, carefully sealed in protective containers, samples from a 34-year-old murder case. Touch DNA lifted from a bloody fingerprint on a pink rotary phone. Biological material preserved since December 1988, the genetic remnants of a killer who'd walked free for more than 3 decades. Lab technician Sarah Chen, not her real name, but she prefers anonymity, remembers unpacking the evidence. Michigan State Police had applied for the federal grant specifically for this case. The cold case unit, led by Detective Todd Peterson, had identified the Swartz murder as their top priority. The evidence quality was good, the family was engaged, and the crime itself represented the kind of brutality that demanded resolution. "We'd been waiting years for this technology to catch up," Peterson explained in a 2023 interview. "The fingerprint was always there, the DNA was always there. We just needed the tool to make it talk." The Swartz evidence wasn't pristine, but it wasn't hopeless either. Michigan State Police had preserved it properly. Climate-controlled storage, minimal handling, documentation at every step. The lab went to work. Othram sequencing extracted over 700,000 genetic markers from the crime scene samples. A full SNP profile, detailed, comprehensive, ready for genealogical analysis. The profile was uploaded to GEDmatch. The system churned, comparing markers, identifying matches. Results came back within days. Multiple genetic relatives scattered across the country. Most were distant, fourth cousins, fifth cousins, people who shared ancestors from the 1800s. But the matches were enough. The genealogists went to work. Family trees blossomed on computer screens. Birth records, marriage certificates, census data, obituaries. Every public document that traces a family through time. The genealogists followed every branch, documented every descendant, looked for the convergence point. It emerged slowly. A family in southwest Michigan, deep roots in St. Joseph County, multiple branches, but all tracing back to a common ancestor. The Waters family of Three Rivers. John and Judith Waters had lived in Three Rivers for decades. Solid citizens, church on Sundays. John worked manufacturing, Judith kept house and raised their four sons grown now, scattered by life. One deceased died years ago, unrelated to the case. Three still living in Michigan, all married, all settled, all traceable. One who'd moved away. Robert Odell Waters, relocated to South Carolina in the early 1990s. The family tree pointed at the Waters brothers. One of them, the evidence said, had left his blood and DNA at a murder scene 34 years ago. Michigan investigators moved quickly but carefully. This was a 34-year-old case. They couldn't afford mistakes. Detectives obtained DNA samples from the three Michigan brothers through voluntary submission. Each agreed to cooperate. Confused, certainly, but willing to help clear their names. The lab processed the samples within days, eliminated all three. Their DNA didn't match the crime scene evidence. That left Robert Odell Waters. Born 1969 in Three Rivers, Michigan, the same year as Kathy Swartz. Attended Three Rivers High School, same as Mike Warner. Graduated, worked odd jobs locally, then moved south around 1990. He'd built a life in Beaufort County, South Carolina. Started a plumbing business, Waters Plumbing, that grew into a successful regional company. Married a local woman, raised two children, attended church regularly, coached youth sports. His record was spotless, not even a parking ticket. On paper, Robert Odell Waters was a pillar of his community, a family man, a successful businessman, the kind of neighbor you'd trust to watch your house while you were on vacation. But the DNA said something else entirely. Investigators coordinated with South Carolina authorities. Surveillance began on Waters' ranch home in Beaufort County. Detectives watched him come and go, driving his work truck, attending church, picking up grandchildren from school. He had no idea anyone was watching. Detective Todd Peterson of Michigan State Police and Detective Sam Smallcombe of Three Rivers PD flew south the following day. They checked into a motel near Beaufort, reviewed their files one final time, and barely slept. 35 years. Countless investigators, thousands of tips, hundreds of suspects eliminated. It all came down to this. April 30th, 2023. 7:40 a.m. The morning was warm by Michigan standards. Low 70s, humid, the South Carolina sun already climbing. Spanish moss hung from oak trees lining the quiet residential street. Sprinklers hissed across manicured lawns. Three vehicles pulled into Robert Waters' driveway, Peterson and Smallcombe in the first car. Beaufort County Sheriff's deputies in the second and third. Waters answered the door in his work clothes, khaki pants, company polo shirt with Waters Plumbing embroidered on the chest. He was 53 years old now, balding, carrying an extra 30 pounds around his middle. Reading glasses hung from a cord around his neck. He looked like someone's grandfather, because he was. "Can I help you, officers?" Peterson showed his badge. Michigan State Police. A long way from home. Mr. Waters, we'd like to ask you some questions about a matter in Michigan. Something flickered behind Waters' eyes. Recognition? Fear? Or just confusion at badges from a state he'd left 3 decades ago? Michigan? I haven't lived there in years. We know. May we come inside? The question started casually. When did you leave Michigan? What brought you to South Carolina? Do you remember Three Rivers? Then Peterson produced the warrant. We need to collect fingerprints and a DNA sample, Mr. Waters. The color drained from his face. What is this about? The murder of Kathy Sue Swartz, December 2nd, 1988. Waters said nothing. His hands trembled as the technician rolled his fingers across the ink pad, pressed them to the card. The DNA swab was quick. 30 seconds. A brush against the inside of his cheek. 35 years of evidence, waiting. 30 seconds to collect the match. The results came back within hours. The lab in Texas worked around the clock. This case had priority. The fingerprint on the pink rotary phone, exact match to Robert Odell Waters' right index finger. The DNA from biological samples at the scene. 99.99999% probability match. The blood that wasn't Kathy's type O from her attacker's wounds, consistent with Waters' genetic profile. Every piece of evidence gathered painstakingly in 1988, preserved for 35 years, analyzed with technology that didn't exist when Kathy Swartz died. All of it pointed to the same man. Robert Odell Waters, childhood friend of Mike Warner, visitor to apartment 12 just weeks before the murder, 18 years old in December 1988. A monster hiding behind a grandfather's face. That evening, Robert Odell Waters was arrested for open murder in the death of Kathy Sue Swartz. He didn't fight, Peterson recalled later. Didn't protest. Didn't proclaim his innocence, just went quiet, totally empty. Like he'd been waiting for this knock his whole life. The handcuffs clicked around his wrists, the same wrists that had wielded a kitchen knife 35 years ago. Courtney Swartz received the call that night. We got him, Detective Smallcombe said, his voice thick with emotion. We finally got him. She wept for an hour. Great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. 35 years of waiting. 35 years of wondering. Her daughter found her on the kitchen floor, phone still clutched in her hand. After the tears subsided, Courtney drove to the cemetery. She stood between 2 graves, her mother's and her grandmother's, as the sun set over Three Rivers. We did it, Grandma, she whispered. You can rest now. We finally got him. The indictment came swiftly, May 1st, 2023. St. Aubin Joseph County Prosecutor's Office filed formal charges against Robert Odell Waters. Open murder in the death of Kathy Sue Swartz. Open murder in Michigan encompasses both first-degree and second-degree murder, allowing prosecutors flexibility at trial. The evidence supported premeditation. Waters had visited the apartment, learned the layout, returned when Mike was at work. But the exact degree would be determined by a jury. If convicted of first-degree murder, Waters faced mandatory life imprisonment without parole. The evidence was overwhelming. The fingerprint on the phone, the DNA from biological samples, his blood at the scene drawn by Kathy's desperate defense, his presence in the apartment weeks before the murder. The FBI profile that fit him perfectly. Three Rivers exhaled collectively. The wound that had festered for 3.5 decades was finally being addressed. Chief Scott Bowling stood at the podium, Kathy's photograph displayed behind him. After all this time, he said, we have a name. We have accountability. The Swartz family has waited long enough. Bail was denied. Waters was held at Beaufort County Jail pending extradition to Michigan. His attorney, a public defender appointed when Waters declined to hire private counsel. filed routine motions but offered no substantive defense. The trial was scheduled for fall 2023. Michigan versus Robert Odell Waters. Justice finally within reach. Courtney Swartz began preparing her victim impact statement. She'd waited her entire life for this moment. 35 years of photographs and secondhand stories, 35 years of memorials at a grave. 35 years of wondering what kind of monster could butcher a 19-year-old mother and walk away. Now she would face him. "I wanted his eyes to see what he took," she said in a 2023 interview. "Everything he stole from me, not just my mother, my whole life, the childhood I should have had, the relationship I never got to build. I wanted him to sit there and look at me and understand." She wrote draft after draft, searching for words that could capture 35 years of loss. How do you explain growing up with a ghost? How do you describe the hole where a mother should be? How do you make a killer understand the weight of what he did? "My first memory should be my mother's face," one draft read. "Instead, it's a photograph. My first lullaby should be her voice. Instead, it's my grandmother singing songs she said my mom loved. You took everything from me before I was old enough to remember it." She planned to deliver the statement at sentencing. To stand in that courtroom, face the man who'd murdered her mother, and make him listen. It never happened. On May 6, 2023, 6 days after the arrest, the correctional officer making rounds approached cell 14B. Robert Waters' cell. Standard check. Every inmate verified alive and accounted for every hour. The cell was quiet. Too quiet. The officer's flashlight beam swept across the bunk, found it empty, then found Waters. He'd fashioned a ligature from his bedding, torn strips braided into a rope, looped through the ventilation grate, cinched around his neck. His body hung slack, feet nearly touching the floor. His face was purple, eyes bulged open. The officer's radio crackled with emergency codes. Medical staff rushed from the infirmary. CPR was attempted for 18 minutes. No pulse, no heartbeat. Robert Odell Waters was pronounced dead at 4:05 a.m. Autopsy confirmed self-inflicted asphyxiation. No foul play. No intervention from other inmates or staff. He'd simply waited until the overnight lull, constructed his noose, and stepped off the edge of his bunk. Toxicology came back clean. Nothing in his system except Tylenol for back pain. He left no note, no confession, no explanation. The coward's exit. The news hit Three Rivers like a second murder. Courtney received the call at 6 a.m., wrenched from sleep by her phone's insistent buzzing. Detective Smallcomb's voice was hollow. "I'm so sorry. Waters is dead. He killed himself in his cell last night." Her scream woke her daughter. She'd waited 35 years, endured 35 years of not knowing. Watched her grandmother die still waiting for answers. And now, 6 days after the arrest, the man who'd murdered her mother had escaped again. "He didn't even give me that," Courtney said later, her voice scraped raw. "A trial, a verdict, a chance to face him, a chance to ask why. He took that too. He took everything, my mother, my closure, my grandmother's peace, and then he took his own way out." The motive died with Robert Waters. Was it a planned sexual assault that spiraled out of control? Had Kathy rejected in advance, triggering murderous rage? Was there some history between them, a grudge, an obsession that investigators never uncovered? Did he target her specifically, or was she simply vulnerable and available? We'll never know. The answers, all of them, went to the grave with a coward who couldn't face what he'd done. Before you go, I need to tell you about a case that makes Robert Waters look almost ordinary. On November 9, 1971, 17 years before Kathy Swartz was murdered, a Sunday school teacher walked through his 18-room New Jersey mansion and executed his entire family. His wife, his mother, his 3 children, ages 16, 15, and 13. Then he did something chilling.